In this video, the middle-aged nerds discuss spoilers from books they read decades ago. Do you really need a spoiler alert? Do you really?
Hi, I'm Glenn the Geeky Hippie. Welcome back to Non-Terrestrial Half-Life.
And I'm Bill, also known as Matt Stagger, and welcome to Non-Terrestrial Half-Life, where we take books we read in the first half of our life and reread them and see if they stand the test of time or if it's just nostalgia that makes us love them. This week, we're actually doing Flowers for Algernon. And before we start, just a quick warning. This book was written in 1958. It does use some language and terms that are not sociably acceptable these days. Words like retarded will be replaced by mentally challenged and special needs when possible. But some of those may come up within our discussion. So just a quick warning for you guys to be ready.
And this week, to help us discuss the Flowers for Algernon, we have a buddy of mine, Chad, from the Alamo Studio. How you doing, Chad?
I'm doing great. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Good to have you.
It's always good to have you. Tell me, what is the Alamo Studio?
The Alamo Studio is a kind of a creative collective here in Kalamazoo, Michigan. We make videos of various kinds. Some of us like to make scripted movies. I like to make documentaries. We make commercials for different places because you got to get money to make these things. And it's just all fun that we kind of do on the side. None of us have it as our full-time career. We're just do it on the side and have fun with it.
It's a good video channel to check out. Link will be down below in the description box.
Sweet.
So you're our first-time guest, and we always have we have a special question set aside for the first-time guests. When did you discover you liked to read, and what was that kicked that off?
I honestly don't know. I probably owe a lot of it to like LeVar Burton or something because I grew up in the Reading Rainbow time.
Yes.
So that kind of stuff, like that played a big part in my overall how much I liked in it. But I tried to read really early on, and I was more into the creating. Like I loved being inspired and then wanting to create. So I would make my parents write stories for me, and I would draw the pictures, and we made a lot of picture books that I had written. They're not good, but I made them. And one of the first books that I remember reading on my own, because it's really easy, is the Foot book. That was one of the first books that, like, on my own, I read. A book that inspired a lot of me and my humor and style is The Stinky Cheese Man and Other Fairly Stupid Tales.
Okay.
That's one of my personal favorites.
I don't think I've read that. I'm going to have to pick that up.
It's a great one of the best like kids books you can read. I say kids books. Kids books are for everyone, but that's aimed at that audience. Right. And doesn't speak. I love when books don't treat you like a kid. It's like they're the adult in on telling you a dirty joke. Is kind of how that book comes across, and you like that. Then one of the first fantasy books I read was My Father's Dragon, and that kind of got me into that world. That's a super easy read. Then, of course, Goosebumps were huge. Spent a lot of time on Goosebumps. That's what really got me addicted to, well, introduced me to horror and then to chapter books. And then one of the best books I ever read that kind of solidified me wanting to do it is Holes. That's just a flawless book to me. We read it in 5th grade, and about halfway through, there's a pretty big twist of why they're digging the whole time. And I remember all of us made the teacher spend the rest of the day reading that after recess.
Did they get made into a movie?
They did, yes. And
Shia LaBeouf.
Very young. The screenplay to that as well. It's a pretty solid adaptation.
I was going to say, that sounds familiar. I don't know a lot of people that still have all their books from when they were young, though. That's cool that you still have those books.
I know.
That's really cool.
Yeah, I'm a hoarder when it comes to like physical media. So I have books like from forever ago, and I never throw them away unless there was some reason, unless it was like a piece of junk. Like I keep everything.
I still have 4 racks of DVDs in my hallway.
I
can't get rid of them.
I have 1,000 different DVDs and Blu-rays in my living room.
Are those shiny coasters that you put under your coffee mug?
For you?
Yes.
Yeah, probably.
Yes.
So I'm going to admit to everybody at home right now, normally these, the books that we read on this channel and discuss are stuff that we read the first half of our life. In my case, I thought I had. turns out I had only read the short story of Flowers for Algernon. So I'm coming at this from more of a new reader perspective, kind of like our last episode when we did Starship Troopers. But I had some familiarity from my youth with the story in general, although there are some major differences between the short story and the novel.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be not giving as much of my perspective as a rereader on this, but things should go well. I will be starting us off with, when did you first read this book? How old were you, and what led you to reading this book? Chad, you're our guest. We'll start with you.
Okay, so this book wasn't like a choice. It was kind of an assignment in school. I think for a lot of us, that's what it's going to be.
Yeah.
And that was one, I think the entire class had to read it. It was in American Lit or something like that, that they pulled this book out on us. And I remember like just the title. I mean, I was like a young douchey teen and they were like, oh, flowers, this book's dumb. And then almost immediately I like really dug the writing style. It's, you know, it's a journal and we're seeing things spelled phonetically and not correctly. And I was very impressed by that. And as it goes, the story just really brings you in. And then, man, it hits you in like 100 different ways. So I always held on to that book as really just great piece of literature. One of the best examples of character writing that I know of.
Yeah, for me, it was pretty much the same. It was seventh grade American Lit. This was the first book on our reading list, was Flowers for Algernon. The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton was afterwards. And I remember being really anxious to read that. So I was a little upset that we got this flowery book. But I do remember that like halfway through the story, I was like, whoa. It had this emotional weight even when I was in the seventh grade, although I don't think I truly appreciate it the way I do now. This reread hit me like a Mack truck in the feels. I mean, this one really got me. So, yeah, it was fun.
I read the short story Flowers for Algernon sometime between the age of 10 and 14, I think. I found it in an anthology. It was the Science Fiction Hall of Fame, Volume 1. So it had short stories from like the 30s and 40s all the way up to like 1950s or 60s. And Flowers for Algernon was one of the main ones in there. I believe it was, the short story was a Hugo Award winner when it came out in 59, back in 59. I don't know if the novel ever got nominated for Hugos or Nebulas. I didn't look that up. I failed on that aspect. But I do remember that it was in a collection of other Hugo Award winners.
It actually won a Nebula.
It won a Nebula? Okay.
Yeah.
I've said before on this channel that the first books to make me cry was the Dragonlance books by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman. I think this is probably the first story to have made me cry, because I know I cried when I read this when I was a kid. Not nearly as much as I cried reading the novel the last couple of weeks when I've read it twice now, and it's just devastating and so many levels. I don't think I've read anything that hit me emotionally as hard as this book did, which is probably a good thing. At the time, it didn't feel like it necessarily, but I think he wanted to hit us hard, hit home.
There's a magic when you do come across a book or even a movie or a scene in a show, when it can grip you emotionally enough that you emotionally react. That is magic. And I love those moments, even when it's a bad feeling. If that's what they're going for and they were able to make that connection, it makes it worth it. It's just that special sort of ecstasy of perfect recall where you're in that scene with them and you're sort of feeling what they're feeling. And it's just, it's a magical moment. And I love it when that happens, even when it's bad.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I don't know if this is the book I've cried hardest at, but it definitely could be. I'm trying to think if there was another one, because I know I've cried at multiple books, but
The Fault in Our Stars.
Yeah,
That
Yeah.
gutted
I
me.
haven't gotten to that one yet.
Yeah. That one's, yeah. That one I think makes you cry more intentionally than this book does, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's on my TBR.
I remember being at a stoplight and I was listening to the audiobook and we got to one section and I'm at the stoplight and I am just it's just tears are just gushing down my face and I'm like, I can't see. And I'm like, I have to drive. Why are you doing this to me? I had to hit
Right.
pause.
So, you guys have fairly good memory of reading this the first time. Then your initial reactions.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well, my
I mean-
initial reaction was a short story, so it was a little different. You get a I don't want to say watered down. It's not really a watered down version, but it's a more cut down version. We don't quite go into Charlie's inner self as much.
Right.
I think we'll say in the short story. So
It's like a Spark Notes version of this is what I'd say it's similar to.
Yeah.
Like Spark Notes are great if you want to sum something up, but it can never capture the exact same emotion as the book did. And that's kind of what the short story is.
Yeah, I read the novel the first time in my 20s. It was just after my grandmother had passed, so I didn't know it would be a bad idea to read the novel because I found out it was a novel. I remember this vaguely from high school or junior high. I should give this a shot. And I remember I finished and just went, "Oh, this was a really bad idea right now."
Yep.
So I don't think I processed it nearly as much as I did this time.
I liked the short story enough that I had borrowed the actual novel from the library.
Nice.
And I remember just reading through it, and I don't know if it hit me as hard as it did this time. I think just being older and having more of a grasp on reality than you do when you're like a teenager or 13 is probably enhanced the experience more than anything. So, and I'm around the age. I mean, in the book, he's like 32, 30, 32, 32.
32 in the novel, 37 in the short story.
Yeah, and I'm 35 right now, so it's all like, oh, this is me right now. Like, and that's a completely different point in life than I was when I was reading it when I was 13.
God, I feel old. I'm 49.
Hey, I'll be 51 this summer, guys. So
Hey,
no,
that's all right.
Aging, getting old. So, did this change your reading habits much at all?
Like originally, did change my reading habits? I think it maybe made me take books in English class, assigned books more serious. Like maybe they are good. You have a tendency when you're a teenager, or at least I did, to be anti whatever the school is telling you.
Mm-hmm.
And so this book and I think To Kill a Mockingbird were the first books that I was like, that was really, really good. And then later I went back in life and I reread Lord of the Flies and I liked it a lot more than I did when I was like young. So I am reading amazing literature. I'm just choosing not to embrace it because I'm rebellious and angry at the world for no reason when I'm a teenager. So I suppose it changed me in the sense that it made me want to go back and reread more of the things that I had not given the full attention to earlier.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Although I do remember that when I finished the short story, I immediately went back to Stephen King, and I was like, no, let me go back to Stephen King.
Right.
But I think I did. Like I said, the following book, this one I remember specifically because it was The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. And I had read that probably 2 years before that. And it was one of my favorite books. But I did take reading assignments a little more seriously up until we hit Moby Dick, which is just, I couldn't.
I've also, my entire life, been a science fiction fantasy snob, where most literature teachers hate science fiction and fantasy. I went the exact opposite, and I hated most things that weren't science fiction and fantasy. So it was always hard to get me to read the non-genre stuff in school.
Yeah.
And
now
Moby Dick was a step too far.
Okay, this book is not super like I consider it barely like when I think of normal science fiction. This is like it barely is science fiction, right? Like it has
it dabbles.
It lightly touches on it enough to qualify, but you would, if someone read this and you said you just read science fiction, they might say no, I didn't. Glenn, did you consider this science fiction? Do you think you would have considered this as a teen science fiction?
It was in a science fiction Hall of Fame book anthology, so my brain immediately saw it as science fiction. I'm also pretty loose, as much as I'm biased in favor of those two genres. I'm pretty loose in my definitions of whether it's science fiction or fantasy. Science is at the heart of this story. Without science, the scientific experiment being done, this story wouldn't be there. So I can't separate. I can't separate it from science, but I get what you're saying, that it almost barely, qualifies. But like I said, I'm pretty loose on my definition of science fiction and fantasy.
I feel like it dips its toes into the science fiction, particularly when you get into the procedure and Charlie's ability to recognize the mistake that's made.
Yeah.
We're getting glimpses of it, but this is not hard science fiction by any means. It's
not hard science fiction. No,
I think it's more drama than anything else, honestly.
For sure. That's because I never thought it was science fiction. So when it was like that was an option for this discussion, I was like, oh, I'll do that book. But I never had considered it science fiction. When I reread it this time, I definitely could see where it does touch on enough to qualify for that.
Right.
And plus, that's where he got it published. It was rejected enough mainstream that he kind of had to make it qualify for science fiction. But I do think, like, if I were to give it to one of my friends, I have a friend who's really into like the world building science fiction, like he wants it to be in outer space or it doesn't qualify. Like, I don't think he would ever consider this to actually be science fiction.
Yeah,
I can see his point
too.
Yeah.
The first time you read this character, let's get into some of the characters in this, this book. I mean, who is your favorite character and why? I gotta say, I think the character I liked the most was Alice Kinnear, because she's the most compassionate. She's the most humane. I really like Faye a lot too, but she does get a bit too flighty. But Alice Kinney and Miss Kinnear, I think, is probably the best person in this story throughout, by far. But I liked her as a character a lot, and the effect she had on Charlie throughout, the course of the story. How about you, Bill?
I'd have to go with Charlie. I mean, just going with him on this whole journey. I think we most get to connect with him. If not him, then seriously, Algernon. I mean,
okay.
Yeah, I love the idea that as frustrated as Charlie is, Algernon's got to be more frustrated, because there's no way for him to communicate what's going on with him, with anybody around him. So, there's just something about, every little aspect when he's in it, when he starts to decline, that is so gut-wrenching and heartbreaking that, you get really invested in the character. I mean, just like Mr. Jingles in the Green Mile, or Wilson the volleyball, and,
Castaway.
You just can't help but get invested.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to kind of hate to say Charlie, because that is like the main character. Yeah. So it's like, that's not very original, but that is who's telling me the story, and that is who the only person I'm really crying for is him. As far as side characters go, if I had to choose someone, I always liked the character of, I had to look up the name. I forget names really easy, but the character of Gimpy was one of my favorites. Gimpy's a very well-written, flawed human character, where Gimpy is nice to him, but also does bad things. And, and when change happens, I love the entire, sorry, we're probably going off on this, but
No, you're
Go
fine.
ahead.
The entire thing with when he gets too smart for them and he begins to see that they're not that smart. They're all kind of, you know, they're making fun of him to make themselves feel better, but really they are insecure and they don't feel that intelligent in the real world. And
Yeah,
I think
seeing
go ahead,
Charlie sort of realize that is what really, grasps me in the story is, as he gains wisdom, he also gains the ability to understand that, wait a minute, they've been making fun of me this whole time. I thought they were my friends. And, you get this feeling of betrayal for him. You're like, man, he should be mad, but he's not.
Yeah. Yep. And Gimpy was never really making fun of him. I think that's why I had more compassion for his character. But like when he's stealing and then they have that
skimming off
moment,
out of the till,
and then he's still like, he is now almost intimidated by this person that he tried to defend and protect for so long. And now he doesn't know what to do in that relationship or what is his position in this relationship. And I think that's a lot of people would come into that if that's how they're used to someone and that's kind of how things have been for so long. And all of a sudden there's a 180 with a person in there. You begin to question, like, am I this person's friend? What do we do? Do we kick them out of our group? Because now our group's thrown. People do that stuff all the time in high school and college and adult life. So it's, I enjoyed that perspective. And then at the end, when he comes back and then the new guys making fun of him, then all the old guys who made fun of him are like, hey, you leave him alone. And it's kind of like, saying only we can make fun of him and be assholes.
That's the older brother syndrome. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But it's still, when you see that, it is, like you said, older brother syndrome. That's still their brother in some ways, They're all kind of, it's like the Isle of Misfit Toys, and they're all kind of misfits together at this one bakery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do gotta say, I wish Keyes had given us another name for Gimpy, because that character's been boiled down. Keyes treats Gimpy in a way like the characters sort of treat Charlie, at least by giving him the name that it would be as if we never had the name Charlie Gordon. It was just Dummy. If Dummy was the only thing anybody ever called, because they've named Gimpy, or we've got Gimpy named after his disability, his club foot, and we have no other name for him. And I don't like thinking of him as Gimpy, but that's the only name we have.
I think he has the name Gimpy because he's claimed it. He's taken the power back from that name, is what it is.
Okay.
That's why he only goes by Gimpy. That's how I've always seen it. That's why he doesn't give his real name. He's like,
That's how it works.
Yeah, he owns it.
Yeah, that's how I interpreted it, because like he refers to himself as Gimpy, and not like in a stop calling me Gimpy type way, or I'm mad that you're calling me that. It's like, now it's a term of endearment. This is my name. Call me Gimpy. I know what I am and I own it. So let's just
taking it back.
Yeah.
Take it back. Yeah. So I don't think in one point they're ever like Gimpy is Gimpy, because then that would be a problem. But that's just like the name he gave himself. So I can understand why someone wouldn't want to be called that, but I think in this case, it's never really used as an insult for him. That's just like the name he's adopted.
Do you guys think when Charlie goes back to work at the bakery, do you think that the people that were there know what he went through? Do you think they ever found out that he had an operation?
He says that he explains it. He says what happened. That. But it's like, what? This is in a later point at that. So do we know how he said it, and if it was factual? Does he remember everything that he actually went through at this point? Does he remember it accurately? But they saw it enough that I feel like if he even came close to saying it, they would have to go, yeah, okay, that does, as weird as it is, it makes sense within what we experienced here.
Right. It sort of fits with their narrative.
Yeah.
So I don't think they'd have a problem grasping it and being like, oh, okay.
Did this reread change your view of the characters that, at all from previous reads?
Yeah, his mother, yes. I don't think I've
Oh
quite
boy.
been as angry at a character in a while. Um, I get she was overwhelmed. At the same time, she was so bitter and mean. Sometimes, I mean, even to the point where pulling a kitchen knife on the poor kid, and I'm like, as a
Yeah.
parent myself, it made me angry. And I don't remember feeling that much anger towards her. But this time I'm like, dude, I want to, she's horrible. I just,
Yeah, I agree with that. I think probably the mom character is the one that I remembered. I don't remember it being as extreme before,
right?
for whatever reason. And now when I reread it, I was like, wow, she is just. And even when he comes back and like he wants her to, you know, I don't know, like he wants her to almost ask for forgiveness, kind of, but like he just wants that mom relationship, and now she's proud of him, and then he's like, and we just hugged, and I embraced it, and I felt so loved, and I was like, this is still very wrong, like
Yeah.
like now she's accepting you and letting you be her child, and I understand that that is what you've always wanted, absolutely from a character perspective, but that doesn't make me like her anymore, like that makes me like her less still. So I don't know. I never liked her character in this time. There wasn't
Rose is
one point
tough.
where I felt bad for her or
Her
like,
inability to sort of see him as a person
mhm,
instead of an object that needed to be fixed. Yeah, and when he does give her validation by going, "It's okay. See, I'm okay now." It's almost heartbreaking that
yeah,
that's the level he has to be at for her to even acknowledge him as a person, and that is just gut wrenching.
yeah.
Yeah.
The acknowledgement as a person, Glenn. I'm sorry, I keep talking over you.
Go
Nah,
ahead.
you're fine.
The acknowledgement as a person is a big thing for me because multiple times he has to remind people that Charlie is a person too, and
Right?
it's that stuff that really got me when I was reading it because I was like, damn it, that is exactly right. Like Charlie is a person too. You're all acting like Charlie was some like backwards thing that couldn't feel and could do nothing. But and then he's saying like Charlie's still here. This is still Charlie. Charlie
Mhm.
is still a person and was a person. And it's like, man, I loved hearing the author say that in the way that they said it multiple times throughout the book.
Yeah,
Yeah.
especially when they were doing the presentation in Chicago,
Oh yeah.
and
Yeah.
he was like, I was Charlie before the surgery.
Yeah.
I
Yep.
was a
There was a
person.
moment. I actually did a fist bump and listening to it in the fist bump in the air when Charlie went off on the people at the diner when the busser dropped all those dishes and they were laughing
Yeah.
and then finally he blows up at them. I was like, yes, somebody needed to say that. I'm glad Charlie said it.
Yeah, one of the classes that
So
I helped do at the high school when I was in that role was career exploration. So we would take the youth out to different places, to different
Mhm.
jobs, and they got to kind of explore like what that is, and it's helping us see what their workload capacity could be if immediately after high school, if they're expected to get a job, and some of them are, whether that's good or bad, what can we do and how can they do it? And so that was a big thing right there where like, it fell. And I feel like maybe I'm naive. I feel like now a restaurant would not necessarily all start mocking that person out loud. I feel like
no.
nowadays I don't see that happening. And if it did, multiple people would probably stop that immediately. So I'm glad, I guess, that when I was doing it, we're here now. But you still hear people come to you. I was like the teacher thing. So they would come to me and be like, they're doing the best they can, huh? And like pat me on the back as if like, good for you helping the unfortunate. And that stuff still happens. And so that part got me, especially just almost, like you said, it kind of enraged me a little because it took me back to when that happened all the time. It's like,
Right.
good for you taking care of this person. So nowadays they might say something to his boss, like, you did a great job in that circumstance, as if like,
Right.
because it's so hard to deal with a person.
We were talking about that earlier. I was commenting to Glenn on how horrible human beings are sometimes, and you forget that, and you read something like this, and it reminds you. He's like, "Do you still think we're that awful?" I'm like, "Yes, but I think we're a little more circumspect with how awful we're being. We'll sort of turn it into a backwards compliment, or do it in a way where it could be seen as joking or not. It's like we've gotten smarter about how to be mean, which is not necessarily a good thing." My
Yeah.
son actually has Asperger's. He's pretty high functioning, but he does social cues are just not there for him at all. He went through a program in high school called Blast, and they worked with him. They did the job thing, and actually, that's when he started kitchen, doing kitchen prep,
Yep.
washing dishes, and things like that in restaurants. He's been working at Applebee's for 3 years now, so
That's
he's
awesome.
doing 30 plus hours a week, and it's not like that for him at all, which I'm glad to see. If there were any issues, he's been able to handle them or talk them out with his boss and his staff. So I am glad to see that that's not how it is now, because let me tell you, I would be one angry father.
Right.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can tell you this. I know people will still applaud, when a server, busser, dishwasher, cook, or whoever drops a bunch of dishes and they break in a restaurant, but that's all they do. It's just, I hear it all the time still. When I worked in restaurants, I got it a couple of times. Everybody's clumsy at some point or another, you know, but that kind of thing still happens. I'm not as aware. I don't watch as much for bullying of people for mental capacity as much, but I have to admit that there are times where there are certain people that I just call idiot, or I've used the word moron, to describe somebody like a congressman who asked the asked the government branch if they can change the orbit of the moon to fight climate change. And when you ask a question like that, to me, you're an idiot, and I I feel bad after reading this book this past couple of weeks, thinking that word in my head about people who would ask something stupid like that. So I'm admitting here to myself, I have discovered a flaw in my own brain processes from reading this book that, I do kind of play into the whole bad things, the attitude that these people had in this book, but not in the same way. Because I would never target it at somebody who's actually legitimately mentally disabled or handicapped in some way. It's people who are presumably of normal intelligence that I am more likely to call an idiot or a moron when they say or do something stupid. And it makes me feel bad, and it's something I'm having to think about a lot, and it's part of what's been so rough about reading this book, is like, God, I'm an asshole. Is the thought that's gone through my head. And I already knew that, but realizing it again, it's like, wow, Glenn, I need to try to change the way I think about people.
Well, I mean,
so I've learned a lesson from this.
doing something without thinking about it or not knowing any better doesn't necessarily make you an evil person.
Yeah.
Knowing it's wrong and doing it is a different ball game altogether. You've made a bad decision. It's wrong. You went ahead and did it anyway. So I sort of view them differently. I get you're kind of beating yourself up about that. I don't consider that big of a deal. I did have an issue with they used the word retarded a lot, which at the time was actually scientifically acceptable.
Yeah. They do, and it definitely dates it in some ways, but you have to. In this case, it's never really used as an insult in the book,
right?
And that I think is a key thing to note, because like they're not saying it to that he is this. I mean, they are labeling him as that, but in a science aspect and not in a. And that's why he's not good at anything. They're just saying the word.
The book
it's
uses
never
the
used
word
as
more
a slur.
clinically.
Yeah,
it's used clinically.
Yeah, it's never used as a slur. It's only used as a diagnosis almost.
Yep. Glenn, I'm definitely like you in the sense of that I I belittle political leaders all the time. And I think there's pros and cons to that. I think there's a line where like we were saying that, you kind of, if you're trying to do that on purpose and be difficult like that, I might still say something like that. But you can usually, I don't know. When I worked with people with disabilities, I didn't ever hear of someone, at least nowadays in high school, very rarely did anyone actually call them anything that would belittle them, even if they call each other that. And that's the weird thing to me, is like, we still take it and use it to belittle, but we don't mean it except for people with disabilities. Like and as if somehow that will, clarify everything that we're not really bad, but it's still not a good thing to say.
Yeah. And even though Charlie in the story never uses words like that to describe others, he does, when he's at his peak, he is kind of belittling to all the professors and scientists that he'd been working with that, that did this procedure on him. And I mean, if you look at it, he looks at them a lot like the way people looked at him, except he's not laughing at them about it. But he's still angry. I mean, he was so angry when he found out all these scientists weren't geniuses, and he was very angry at that point in the book. Yeah, I think that's the first time he's actually quite angry, if I remember correctly. Was when he
the movie theater was the first time he got angry. When the ending was the perfect storybook ending, he got pretty angry. He got loud and actually, he got angry.
I forgot about that.
Yeah. I think I understand where he's coming from, though.
Yeah, 100%.
It's because now that you can understand things, all these people that were flawless to you are now flawed. And that does change a lot. I mean, for a lot of us, even in the world now, we loved, on Twitter, we loved this one actor. And now we found out that a decade ago, they did some very bad things. And now we erupt over it because our vision of these people has changed. They're no longer. This happened with Chris Pratt, like him or not. Everyone kind of wanted him to be his Parks and Rec character, and when it turns out that's not who he was, they he's not cool. Like it's cool to not like him, and
it was a backlash.
And there's backlash over various things that he's done that his character that we loved and got introduced to wouldn't have done. And I think for Charlie, these were all basic one-dimensional characters to him. And now he's seeing them as the three-dimensional things they are, and he has that same, Twitter anger that we see now.
I think it's a little bit like that moment when you realize your parents are fallible. When you're a kid, and I can't pinpoint the exact moment it happened, but I do remember that feeling of, oh wow, my parents are just people. They don't always have the answer. They don't always know what's going on.
Yep.
So I very much sort of likened it to that. That was that moment for Charlie of sort of.
Were there any character flaws and characters that you didn't notice the first time reading this that stood out this time around?
I got a little mad at Matt. He got real apathetic at the end there. His father, Charlie's father. He did a pretty good job of sticking up for him in the beginning. I don't know if he just got wore down or what, but by the end, you could sort of feel his apathy. And I never noticed that before, where he was just like, can this wait till tomorrow? And he's talking about getting rid of the kid and taking him to a facility to live there forever. And he's just, I don't know if he's so beaten down or what, but I never noticed that apathy, I don't think, at that portion in the story. And
I don't know if I guess it's apathy. I think for me, it's more just exhaustion of this same thing coming up every day. If you ever have like the same fight or like, you get together with someone and after a while the same thing always comes up and they just want to talk about it forever and be right. And you have to sit there and after a while you go, can this wait? Like, yeah, or yeah, you're right. Or like, because you're just going to keep doing the same thing. It seems like this was a vicious cycle that had to get to a point of eruption because he didn't want to do what she did. She didn't want to do what he did. But obviously she was the loud one and was going to get her way. So I guess, apathetic in some ways, but I think more just tired, exhausted.
Entropy almost rather than apathy. Just
a
stagnant point where he's like, I can't push him.
Yeah, I did want. I love the scene where he goes and sees his dad. Like, I think that's very well done.
Oh yeah.
It's also hard for me because I was like, I really kind of want to know what would have happened if you told him.
If he told him,
yeah.
The parent that actually seemed to accept Charlie when Charlie was a child is the one parent that I wish we'd gotten to see him actually talk to. Instead, the only one he talks to is his mom and then his sister. And they were very unaccepting of him in his youth. Well, and it just, I wanted to see more between Matt and Charlie. And
I think that's why he seeks the validation from his mother and his sister more than his father. He already had it from his father. So for him, the thing he was missing was it from his mother and sister. So I get why psychologically he would sort of fixate and focus on the mom and his sister.
And at this point, his mom's not even capable of giving it because she's not lucid all the time.
Right. I did love the sister when the sister is remembering things that she thought were just like they didn't happen before. Because they were so horrifying or whatever. And she's like, I feel like I've seen this exact same thing before. And it's like, well, you did. And you've chosen to view it in a different way, kind of to recover from the trauma. But it still happened. And I thought that whole scene was really heartbreaking, but also just well thought out, well written.
Well,
I did like really seeing the growth in Norma.
Yeah, that was the thing. It was really good seeing her being a functioning decent human being as an adult, because all we got were these snapshots of her being a bratty kid. But I mean, let's face it, kids go through a bratty phase. So
some longer than others.
It was nice to see it didn't stick.
Yeah. I swear, the first time I listened to this a couple weeks ago, the first few times they said his sister's name, or Charlie said his sister's name, I thought he was calling her Normal. Was her name, and I'm like, what?
I mean,
he's calling her Normal, and then I'm like, oh, Norma.
That could have worked
because I was listening to the
audio. I know. I'm like, it fits.
Yeah,
that's why I thought that the first 2 or 3 times he said her name.
Yeah, that could have worked. I mean, that's not wrong. Norma, Normal. Yeah.
Bill, you mentioned this before we started, so I'm just going to ask, were there things that you had forgotten since you first read this that surprised you on this reread?
I forgot in the novel how much sort of sexuality there was in the novel. I think I had forgotten that aspect, that it was focused on. Not overly focused on, by the way, just that it was a focus for Charlie trying to figure out why he's having panic attacks when he tries to be intimate with someone. I had forgotten all about that sort of storyline, and I was like, wow, I had completely forgotten that aspect of this book. So I think it was an interesting exploration of how somebody could be in the situation he was in, and a weird way of coping with it, but finding out what works, So I kind of like that journey into, how he went from so sexually immature and slowly seeing him build up a maturity to a level where he can physically connect as well as emotionally connect with somebody. So yeah, I forgot all about that, but I did enjoy that sort of aspect.
See, I had no idea about that aspect of the book because I hadn't read the book. I'm like, I don't remember this from the short story. And when I reread
Well,
the short story, oh no, but it's
I
not
think that's
there.
why they give you the short story in junior high.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say that there's an awful lot of sex in this book for the time period, but then I remember Stranger in a Strange Land, which the book came out
Yeah.
like a year or two before this, and there's just about as much, if not more, maybe more per volume. You know, the density of sex in this book might be higher than the density of sex in Stranger, but because this
I
is a
would
fairly short book. This is a
I,
really short book.
I'd
Yeah.
say it more delves into the psychology of sex more than the
Yeah.
act itself.
But
Absolutely.
sexuality and sex as a
Yeah.
subject matter is pretty heavy in this book, which surprised me.
Yeah.
Was there anything that you had forgotten about, Chad?
I think I forgot that as he grows, he sees Charlie, which has to do with the sexual aspect,
Right.
but he like sees Charlie watching, and all that,
Mhm.
and then that Charlie at the end sees him watching. I had kind of forgotten about that. It's a really cool concept. I mean, that's some good writing to me to be able to develop that as a way to, you're dealing with two variants of
Yeah.
yourself.
Your sub you is,
Yeah.
peeking in on what's going on with your
Yes, literally,
conscious
like
mind.
physically
Yeah.
there. That's the thing.
The night that he takes Alice to the park to the concert in the park,
Mhm.
did he actually see a boy watching them?
He saw Charlie
playing,
That's
or
his-
was that Charlie?
That's his
that he
first
saw
time
in this
seeing Charlie, as
Yeah,
far as
that's
I
Charlie.
know.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
Because the other times he sees Charlie, it seems like Charlie is a lot younger. You know, he's seeing Charlie as like a child, not so much as a teenager exposing
it varies.
himself, watching a couple.
As he's growing, I think Charlie is getting younger, and then as he's
Because
coming
he's
back,
regressing.
they're getting
Yeah.
closer. Yeah,
Okay. I see that. Yeah.
yeah.
I hadn't looked at it that way. All right.
And Charlie becomes more distant in age as he matures. We'll say.
Mm-hmm. I almost want to say levels up, like it's a video game, but I mean, it's kind of what he does.
Yeah, absolutely.
Flowers for Algernon, lit RPG version.
That is not a world I want to be sucked into. No,
Yeah, there's probably a parody somewhere of that, I'm sure. Flowers for Algernon, the video game. Yeah.
Nobody wins ever.
No.
Now, I'm pretty sure you guys have both of you have touched on this to an extent. But how has your life experience changed your perspective on this story? You've both touched on it, but was there more?
My experience as a father, and particularly the father of somebody who's neurodivergent, has made me far more sensitive when it comes to these topics than I ever would have thought possible. So, yeah, looking at it through that lens as a father completely just changes everything. And I think that's why emotionally it hit me way harder now than it did, when I was in my early 20s and I read it.
So I think that subconsciously it played a big part for me. And I didn't realize until I reread it of like why I wanted to work with youth who are mentally disabled and adults, and why I've always been so damn defensive of people like that. Just because I've had friends who like will crack a joke like that at someone's expense, but it bugs me when that person doesn't know that they're the joke. That bugs me.
Yeah.
If you can defend yourself and then someone makes fun of you, okay, let's teach you how to defend yourself. But you're never going to know that you're being made fun of most of the time in this. And that sucks. And that's, you should never make fun of someone if they don't know it. That's the cheapest form of cowardice that you can do. So I think that rereading, I was like, maybe this played a big, because I didn't have any siblings with a with any form of mental disability. Nothing. So I feel like this book, in a lot of ways, was kind of an awakening to that to me, and probably made me want to put as much effort into that as I have in life.
That makes sense, actually. That completely tracks the, you would move on to wanting to work with people who are mentally challenged or disabled. Like, yeah, I could see this being an influence, particularly as teacher. I mean, she's one of the more redeemable human beings in this entire story. Some of them are just awful. Some of them don't know they're awful, but they are a little bit awful. And she's making the conscious effort to be a good human, not girlfriend, not anything like that. Just a good human.
She's the one character that is consistently throughout the entire book good to others. Even Charlie is not always good to others, especially when he's at his intellectual peak, for however you want to put it, when he's at the top of that bell curve he has. Even he's not always nice to others, the way he treats the scientists and all that. But Alice Kenyon, just throughout, I mean, even when we first meet her, she's teaching at that school. She's helping students with developmental disabilities, and that's just inherently a good thing to do, I think. It's a good, compassionate, morally right thing to do. And she never seems to slip from that throughout the entire ethics. The ethics of getting involved with Charlie in the middle and late part of the book, that in this modern day and age might be questioned, seriously questioned.
For sure it would have been. I mean, let me just say, if it turned out that one of the kids from our ASD room in school went through a science experiment and then we had hooked up, I feel like that would have had a lot of controversy. A lot. So it's a different time. And to be fair, like, that wasn't necessarily Charlie at that point.
Right.
And he even refers that he's not Charlie and that Charlie's here doing something else. But it is still like, she does fall for him rather quickly, all things considered. So I don't know what exactly that is, but I think sometimes too, like, there's always been a thing amongst all genders where sometimes the flawed person, and we want to fix them, and we'll date them because we want to fix them. And this might be a moment where that got wrapped up with her because she wanted to fix him, and now she is. And so now we can date because he's a better person or whatever. And not that I'm trying to add too much to it, probably more than was intended in the book, but that is a thing that we as people can do. So that's what I always kind of viewed it as for her.
Did anybody ever else feel ick in the park when he was putting his arm around her and she was trembling, and he's like, "Are you trying to pretend I don't exist?"
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna have to be more specific.
They're at the park watching the concert, and he keeps trying to put his arm around her, and she does a lot of trembling, and he's like, "Are you trying to forget I exist?" And she's like, "No, Charlie, I'm trying to forget that I exist." That's probably the ickiest I felt at any point with that character.
I get what she's saying, because at first she was very much, okay, no, Charlie, this is not something we should be doing at all, especially right now. Let's wait and see how things develop, type thing. And you do see her giving in a little more each time. So it does bring up the ethical question, like you said. But I mean, if you didn't question The Good Doctor, I don't know if you guys have watched that.
No.
Yeah, it's about an autistic surgeon who ends up marrying his next door neighbor. And, I remember there was a little bit of discussion on, whether it was morally okay to go within that realm. And I look at it kind of like through the frame of my son, and I'm like, he is old enough to make certain decisions himself. You know, who he dates happens to be one of them that he can make those kind of things. Charlie got to a point where emotionally he could handle, or at least begin to handle and learn about a intimate relationship, and that doesn't necessarily mean sex. I mean just the intimacy of even dating, which was never an option for him. So I think we had to explore that side of him, and I don't see any other way they could have done
Are there any other elements that of this book that you would say clash with today's social or political climate or attitudes or mores? I mean, obviously,
that. I think we covered
we don't use the R
most of
word.
those.
Are there? Are there any others? I mean, obviously, we don't use the R word nearly as much as it was used in this book.
Right.
What
I
about
think.
what about the ethics?
No, I was
Of
going to say,
the
I think honestly,
experiment.
from a science standpoint, it still holds up pretty well because I can still see this
Yeah,
happening. Um, I still see
100%.
something
Yeah.
like this being like, and I can see different parents and people being like, test it on my child. I'll volunteer them. I can see that happening. Like, so
Yeah.
it's actually fairly grounded as far as like today. Like you could believe this was
Yeah.
written in the 80s or 90s,
Hmm.
and that would still be a thing. So yeah, I don't know. I think it actually holds up really well in that aspect.
Yeah, like I said, some of the vocabulary is a little off for our times, but it's
For
just
sure.
our times it's off for. Other than that, I really don't have anything that clashes with, I think, modern sensibility.
So you'd say it aged well.
Yeah, absolutely. Other than, like I said, a smidgen of words here and there that,
Yeah.
at the time were acceptable. Like I said, I mean, that was the scientific definition as well as the social definition.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's aged really well.
Yeah. I think a
That
benefit of
said,
that for me is that it is a light science fiction. So it's not like setting itself in the 80s and then it turns out that that's not even close to, what it actually is.
right.
Um, it's not, Blade Runner 2040 2019
Right.
is going to look like this. And it's actually not that much different from the 80s. It's like slight
Right.
variance. So I think in
Cyber
that,
flowers for cyber Algernon.
yes. So I think in that sense, that's a benefit to it. In that it doesn't touch on tech a ton.
No.
I would say I was telling Bill earlier that if somebody was to give me the ability to make this into a movie right now, I would probably still set it as a period piece. I would set it in the 50s, late 50s, early mid 60s. I would use the language that they use because I think that would hit. I think it would slant. It would be more forcefully, emotionally forceful. To the modern audience, hearing him treated that, and called the R word more than, I don't think that would, as we've discussed, I don't think you would hear that if you were setting it today. But if I was to
No.
set it today, I don't know if I'd have it be a surgery. I'd have it be some kind of genetic, manipulate, genetic, retrovirus that rewrites your DNA or something like that. I would change the science behind it. Just it's like Stanley has famously said that if he had known about genetics when he came up with Spider-Man, Spider-Man would have been bitten by a genetically modified spider, not a radioactive spider. It's that kind of updating the scientific idea behind it is
I could
about the
see
only
that.
thing I would change.
Instead of watching the TV at night, he's got to wear VR goggles. I mean, I could see that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 So the last thing I want to bring up is what are some of the themes that you notice now or that are important in this story that you think are worth discussing?
Specs is what are the moral limits of science? And what are in general the limits of science? Should people always be your experiment?
Yeah, well, that's why I was bringing up is the experiment itself ethical, do you think?
I think yes and
I
no. It's
yeah.
it's this really, and the book does a great. Every character in this book is for the most part fairly morally gray. Like there's a flaw with their character. They're not necessarily a bad person inherently. There's no evil villain here. There's no Jafar or Aladdin. It's just like we're all normal people doing what we think is right based on what we know and have experience with. Mm-hmm. And I think that you do want to see if we can adjust things, see if we can make things better. And you are going to have to experiment that eventually at a certain point on people. That's ultimately what you're planning on doing. So you have to. At the same time, is that right? I don't know.
I think yes.
Is there something that needs to be fixed? I don't know. Fixing a problem, or is there something?
I don't know what you could fix. So it's not. I think the issue is I don't necessarily view it as a problem, but I also don't. So this isn't necessarily to me a problem that needs to be fixed in the first place, but also I know lots of youth that would have given anything to be normal, and the ability, if they had it, if it was an option, you can choose to be normal or choose to be the way you are. And if they chose to be normal, I wouldn't blame them or say that's wrong.
Right.
I don't want to be them or in their circumstance every day. And I can't even pretend to imagine what that would be like. So I understand. I had epilepsy, and that's not at all comparable. But the second I was able to have surgery, I had surgery and I got rid of it. And awesome. I could have had it the rest of my life, but why would you want to do that? And so that's where I feel for this here. And I do think, science is always going to have to be amoral somewhat. And this is one of those circumstances where you might have to be, but what you're doing ideally is building up to something better.
I do like that they showed that they did go to his guardians, and they did explain to them what they were going to do, the risks. They explained everything to his mother and his sister. Because the sister even mentions, I thought you were dead until the doctors came to explain to us to get permission and explain everything to us. So, I think it was responsible science. Do I think it was ready for human trials is a different question. No.
If Charlie was asked, do you want to be as smart as this person? He would have said yes, probably. Yeah. We have no reason to think not. Does that mean that he was equipped enough mentally to be making those kinds of decisions? I don't know. But again, a lot of youth that I worked with, they would have, if they could have changed, they would have.
The whole thing going on, they don't go into the science of what they did. We don't really get answers about that at all.
Right.
So,
not really.
We don't know what they did. We have no idea if it was, some sort of gene therapy, if it's a device they implanted in his head. We don't know.
I think they did briefly, like a couple lines talk about there was something that they removed or they inhibited something in a certain area. Did you gentlemen have anything else you wanted to bring up? Any questions that you wanted to pose to the rest?
Just that I think the ending is so heartbreaking because he ends up in the one place that he sort of dreaded and never wanted to return to. I mean, I think he was there for a couple of hours the first time before he was picked up and brought to the bakery. But him going there when he was still able to function was heartbreaking, and knowing that's where he's going to end up is just, it's just gut wrenching.
This book makes me think of a movie that emotionally it's very, very similar. Did either of you ever see the Robin Williams, Robert De Niro movie, Awakenings?
Yes.
Did you get through that with a dry eye?
No.
I know.
I started to get choked up just thinking about that movie. It's a very similar, in some ways, from where he was to being functioning to back down and losing it, but we're seeing it from the doctor's point of view in that movie. And the sad part about that movie is it's based on a real story. You know,
Yeah.
sad part, beautiful part, whatever. I'm kind of choked up thinking about that movie still.
Yep. Yeah, I
That's
think
how
the
the
end
book
of this,
hits me. So
yeah, the end of this book is what got me. And I was reading it at work before I took off, and I was like in my office just crying. And it's such a well written book. The only thing I'd say, if you're watching this and for some reason haven't read it recently, you should do yourself a favor and just go read it.
100%. This is one of
recommend
those
this to
books you
everybody?
have to read.
Yeah.
Every
I
age.
would recommend the short story to anybody under the age of, say, 14. 14 and above, I'd say give the novel a shot, particularly nowadays.
Well, Chad, thank you so much for coming on. It's
Oh,
been a blast hanging
thank you
out
so
with
much for
you.
having me. Thanks for making
You
me
are
read
the-
again.
You're
That was
welcome.
awesome.
You are the
That's
only
us.
person. You are the only person I've had on either of my channels that I actually know in person.
Yeah.
And not just because I made a point of coming up. He had a video or a documentary. He talked earlier about he makes documentaries. He had a documentary short at a local film festival by my side of the state. And what was the movie you did? The documentary?
Last Day for Videos. That's my last documentary I've done. But this year I've got 16 different videos coming out by the end of the year. So it's going to be a big one.
Nice.
Big one. Yeah. And I'm also like
looking forward to it.
on my last leg with my sanity because of all that. But it's awesome.
Will those be available on your YouTube or?
So yes, the Alamo Studio, and then I'm doing a bunch of videos for the Kalamazoo Nature Center. I've gotten the idea that when we go out to like nature places, there not a lot of tech people work there. They're not very up with that. So I want to have QR codes available on as many as I can, and people can scan those QR codes and actually see a video of the trail with the information on it. I think you're going to get more of a connection to younger generations that way as well. And that instead of just seeing, oh, do I want the blue line or the purple line, I can actually see what the differences are. And that hopefully for me will bring more comeback people as well. You know, we have to be able to think about keeping these things going, because right now it's like older people run them.
Right.
And they're not going to be here forever. So how can I guarantee that this piece of land can stay a piece of land and not become, retail space? So that's what was my mission this year. So we're trying it, and hopefully it works out.
Awesome. I love that idea of the QR code.
Yeah.
I mean, because I got to tell you,
Chat.
I see a random one, I'll usually click it just to see what it is.
Yeah. I want to bridge those gaps because tech people can like nature too. They just don't even necessarily know it exists if you don't kind of make it accessible in that way.
Right. Chad's links will be in the doobly-doo down below. I'll make sure of that, or Bill will, one of us. And thank you for coming on. Bill, as always, thank you for doing this show with me. It just came out of a random conversation in a live stream chat one night, and more than a year later, we're still doing it. It's been a blast. Thank you at home for watching. Please come back in 3 weeks as we discuss. I believe Dune is our next one, isn't it? Or is it Tale of Two Cities? I think it's Dune.
It's Dune. Yeah, it's Dune.
It's Dune. We're going to have Mitch, also known as Old Braziers to some of you, on. And we're also going to have Angela from Do Unicorns Read. She's going to be on discussing it with us. And
you know how I feel about Dune.
Oh, yeah.
I love
so
Dune.
Thanks for watching. And don't forget to be awesome.
So, yeah.